All right, welcome back everyone to another episode. This is interesting because we try to do this so many times already, time confusions. And as we were just talking about, I had done this before with Jason and Kiese. And I'm going to say that podcast is in the vault. We're going to leave that one in the vault. But he needs no introduction, but I'm going to allow him to introduce himself. I have an amazing individual with me today. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, everybody. This is Jason Reynolds, the author of a whole bunch of stuff.
Jason, how are things? How you doing?
Things are good, man. Things are
Yeah.
good. Things are good in that I am healthy.
Hmm.
I am making things that I believe in, that I love. I am trying to carve out a bit more time for myself.
Hmm.
But ultimately, I'm good. Like I'm all right. I'm always in a state of exhaustion, right?
Hmm.
As you know, but I'm sorting that out too, and soon, hopefully, I'll have some rest coming and some vacation time or something.
I appreciate that too. And I know that speaking of writing and doing the things you love, most recently, um, 24 seconds.
Mm.
I mean, I'm not surprised. I have so many questions, but I have so many questions. Why now? And what is the importance around, just like Black romance in general, specifically when it comes to males? And I know that I've read a few articles just having you talk a little bit about it, but talk about the process, talk a little bit about what we can expect in the book.
Man, I think so. I've It's interesting, Gary. Over the last couple of years, I've really been trying to understand myself as it pertains to ideas around masculinity.
Hmm.
All of my books are about the same thing, right? Like all of my books are basically trying to figure out ways to subvert the ideas around masculinity, or at least challenge them or deconstruct them, or put them on display in ways that feel absurd and or a bit more balanced. Like just trying to, I'm wrestling with it, right? Like I'm always wrestling with it, and the conclusion that I've come to as of late is that it just doesn't serve me at all, and that it hasn't served me, and it's only harmed me and the people around me. And I'm not sure why I'm holding on to such a concept as it stands today, right? And in the midst of all of this process of trying to figure this out for myself, right? And this is only me, right? I'm not. People are always like, so many men are like, "Nah, dog, I'm a masculine man, and it means this." And I'm like, brother, cool. If that's on you, you know what I mean. And what I'm saying is, I can't change well, I can, but I'm not interested in changing my maleness. I'm interested in deconstructing the clothes that it wears. And in doing so, I've had to have some tough conversations. And one of those conversations was me asking myself and many of my homeboys around me, has anyone ever asked you, ever in your life, how you felt emotionally before losing your virginity? It's not a conversation. And they all said unanimously, was like, no. One friend even burst into tears because he realized that that part of who he is and who he was had been completely ignored and dismissed. Instead, it's conversations around sort of like womanizing, conversations around sort of being, I'm trying to watch my language this time, Gary. Conversations around being a horn dog, right? It's like just go get it, do this, that, and that. It's always it. It's never women becoming it, girls becoming it. And in this particular context, I'm speaking about heterosexual boys specifically in this particular context, even though my gay homeboys are like, it ain't that much different, right? Right. But like this idea that like no one's ever said, hey, how do you feel? Because if they would ask that, most of us would say we feel nervous and afraid and insecure. We feel like we're questioning our body image and our bodies, especially Black boys who are expected to be endowed and to be all the stereotypes that come with being a Black boy in this country. We're expected to be grown men as 14-year-olds and 15-year-olds. We're expected to know what we're doing. right? We're expect like all of this stuff, right? And we're really we're terrified and we're excited because we're still, going through the motions of hormonal change, right? So we're also excited. We also feel tenderness and love. I was in Australia. They did a poll that said something like, for the Australian kids, something like 80% of teenage boys want to lose their virginities in loving relationships. And 60% of that 80% found themselves to be anomalies just because they don't talk to one another, right? Think about that. Gary, you know this, you're a married man. And the secret about being a grown man is that all of us really want to be the little spoon. We never say it, but we all know it. The women in our lives know it. Right? And so, what this book is exploring is sort of like what that might look like. How can we talk about the tenderness of Black boys, the normalcy of Black love and of teenage love in general, the very sort of pedestrian yet it's almost sex is a pedestrian phenomenon. It's both. It's the most interesting and complex yet normal thing we will ever experience, right? It's a pedestrian phenomenon. And so how do we address the fact that like this is a very normal thing that they want to explore, and yet it has a phenomenal effect on who we become afterwards, but it does not have to be a thunderstorm or a hurricane or an earthquake. It could just be another form of play and communication, right? And that's what the book is about. Oh, you muted, man. I can't hear you, Gary. I can't hear you. Oh, no, I lost you. I can't hear you. I can see you fine, but it says you're muted on my side. There
Can you
you
hear me
go.
now?
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
Um, I've already told you this, but it's so funny because you write so many books that are what are needed and so timely. And like, I wish I had that book growing up because
Man.
everyone around me, specifically television and the media, told me opposite of that.
Yes,
Specifically, how to treat a woman as well.
bro.
Um,
Imagine what
it,
pornography has done.
oh my gosh, like
Oh,
yeah, and the type of pornography as well, because like nowadays kids are able to have access to. You mean it doesn't even have to be like naked people. Like they can get access to anything at any
easy.
time just by scrolling
Yeah.
any social media, anything.
Yes.
And,
It's different, man.
and yeah, and I think I think it's so timely because there's so much about how what a man should look like and what a man should feel, and having access to something like this could be so beneficial, so
Yeah.
beneficial.
I hope so.
How are you able to? And I mean, just like your writing style in general, how are you able to stay true to like your writing style, and the things that you specifically would tackle in other books that you've written into what you're doing now? Is it written in free verse?
Got
What
you.
was the process for that?
So this one was tricky. Um, as we like this, the other thing about talking about sort of the masculinity thing and all of that stuff is understanding that like, as a man, it it's really, really, really dicey to navigate the sexual lives of teenagers on the page.
Mm,
So, and what I mean by that is because of sort of whatever the energy is around like manness and masculinity
hmm.
and all that stuff, it doesn't always feel as safe to the reader knowing that a man wrote it, right? It's
Sure.
very different, right? It's interesting,
Hmm.
right? And I've been trying to wrestle with this too, right? It's an interesting thing that we have to kind of admit and kind of figure out how to deal with. And so I knew that going into it. So I knew that the one thing that could not be written was the actual sex scene.
Hmm.
I knew
Hmm.
that I could not, right? Like I would not walk the line well enough to write a sex scene of a boy and a girl
Hmm.
as a 40, of a 16, 17-year-old boy and girl as a 40-year-old man, right?
Hmm.
I knew that would be
I
a,
get that.
you see what I'm saying? Like that's a
Yeah, I
very
do. Yep.
very tricky thing to navigate, and it's slippery. And honestly, it's too easy for it to slip into something perverse,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I knew I had to start the story right at that moment and move backward.
Huh.
Right. So the story, so the reason it's called 24 seconds from now is because we start chapter one is now, right? We're at right now.
Mm-hmm.
And he's in the bathroom. He's freaking out. He's got the condom. He's going through all of the things that we secretly go through, right? Am I
Mm-hmm.
ashy? You know what I mean? How's my
Are my
breath?
lips dry?
Are my lips right? Exactly. Like all the things that we go through. And then the next chapter is 24 seconds ago.
Ah.
So 24 seconds from now is the chapter we never get to, which is
Uh-huh.
where the sex happens,
Uh-huh.
right?
Uh-huh.
And so it goes
Oh
24.
shit, I like that. I like
Yeah,
that. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I
So
like
it goes
that.
24 seconds ago, then it goes 24 minutes ago, then it goes 24 hours ago, 24 days ago, 24 weeks ago, and then 24 months ago when they meet. And then it comes back to, and then it ends coming back to the bedroom. And you see a moment of them coming together, and that's, I won't spoil the ending, but yeah,
That's so that's so what is your creative process? Because you obviously write amazing work, but like there's so many layers to what you do.
yeah,
Like how do you get to that point? Like how do you start from thinking like do you just like flash draft and then you're thinking of chapters? Because like how do you know your chapters are going to be that? Because
yeah.
that's not everybody. Everyone can't do that.
I appreciate that, man. For me, it's all about like acknowledging what's in the way of things. So it's all about working
Mm,
around what's in the way of things because there's always something in the way of things,
mm-hmm,
right? As the great poet Amir Baraka said, right? There's something in the way of things. And so for me, in
mm-hmm,
this particular situation, it was like the thing in the way of things is a sex scene. That's in the way.
mm-hmm.
Right. It's the most important part, but not really, but it's in the
Yeah,
way. Right? And I need to
yeah,
figure this out. In Long Way Down, it was, time constraint was in the way. And what I mean by that is I couldn't convince people that this happened in a minute of this kid's life if it took them 2 weeks to read.
mm,
Right? The book
mm-hmm,
had to feel like it was moving second by second. You had to be able to
yeah,
turn the pages really fast, right? Time was in the way of things. So I had to figure out how to make it work for me. You see
mm-hmm.
what I'm saying? So
I do.
there's always something for me, right? Because of the way I choose to make these stories, there's always something in the way of things. And once I can create sort of a way around it or a way to circumvent that thing, it creates a natural boundary. It creates a format. And as long as I got some walls to play around in, I can be as
Uh huh.
creative as possible.
I love that. I
Yeah.
love that. And I can't go without asking. So my favorite piece of work that you've done. I mean, again, I enjoy everything that you do, but the boy in the black suit is still my like.
Same. Same. Mine too.
It is. I mean, it was one of the first books that I read from you, and it was handed to me from my wife. She was like, "You need to read this book," and like, it just the way that it talks about grief and just like just black culture in general. When I was able to read a story and it talked about like the different ways that like, funerals were happening. And I was like, damn, that's like that's home. You said before, like, I'm from Canada. I live in like Preston, this like black community where like no one knows about. But this when you were talking what you were talking about in that story was exactly the same thing that happens in my home. And I'm wondering, like, for those of you who haven't read the story, tell me about the process for Boy in the Black Suit because the way that grief is talked about is such a way to like give access to kids to, learn about how to deal with loss and think about loss, which is not an easy thing for anyone to start a conversation around.
Yeah. That story was rooted in like so much of my own life. I had lost a lot of people really early and went to a lot of funerals very, very young. And I was always fascinated by them just uh, because grief should be a communal thing.
Mm,
And you when you experience a funeral, you're experiencing in the black community, you're experiencing what we call a celebration, right? But it's also so sad at times. It's hilarious at times, right? It's the most like it's interesting because there's so much happening. We eat afterwards and talk
Hmm.
trash and you know what I
Listen to
mean. But
music.
it's the music, right? There's a really wide range of emotions that take place at these things,
Hmm.
while also really being in the presence of a deceased loved one, right? Which is in and of itself. I mean, and because of all of our ceremonial dramatics, right? We're a culture full of theatrics. Like that's our jam. We love pomp and circumstance, right? We have
Hmm.
to then. So think about like the fact that we got to carry the casket, and the casket is open most of the time. We got to walk up. You got to look in the casket. You know what I mean? You got to turn to the people who are the next of kin. You got to offer them your condolences. Have a
Hmm.
seat. Go through the service. You got to listen to Ecclesiastes, right? There's a time to reap and a time to sow. You got to go through all of that. The preacher's going to preach a sermon that's going to be so vague. It's going to be so vague. You don't even know this person, right? Like
Yeah.
not well enough to unless this is an old person who's been in this church for 45 years and
Hmm.
they come
Hmm.
up together and they know Miss Jenkins got make the best pie and she brought me pie when I was a young
So true.
pastor. We go through all this stuff, right?
It's so true.
And then afterwards, we carry this casket out. We all go to the cemetery. If it's close to the church, you walk. If it's not, you ride through the city. The lights are flashing. You get all the way to the cemetery. Then we get underneath a tent. And when you get
Mm-hmm.
underneath that tent, you got to put the casket back on rollers. And then,
Mm-hmm.
and they stopped doing this, I heard, but back in the day, you had to stand there as they lowered the casket
You do.
into the
You
ground
do.
and then throw dirt, the first panful of dirt, ashes to ashes, dust, to throw the dirt
Yep.
on the casket. All of this is the most joyful, painful, depressing, funny, musical thing you have ever experienced.
It really is, though.
and I
It
will,
really is.
and the truest part of it all that I wanted to capture in this book is that the truest part of it all is that none of that matters when you get home. Because when you get
Mm.
home, the loss is still a loss. And you have to figure out how to carry the weight of the loss. Now, I tell my young people who have dealt with this and who have read this book, I always tell them, think about death and grief the way that you think about a broken knee or a broken
Mm-hmm.
ankle or a broken wrist, right? These parts of the body that are jointed, right? These parts of the body that are used to sort of like bend. If you and
Mm-hmm.
any athlete, and you're an athlete, you know this. If you break an ankle, or if you roll an ankle, or you break a knee, they can they can mend it, but it will never heal.
No.
It will
No.
never heal. It will become mended enough for you to run and jump and make your movements. But every now and then, you will feel the pain and know
You
that
will.
it is not the same knee. It is not the same knee, right?
That is so
It is
true.
right, and that is what it means to lose people, right? You're never
Mm-hmm.
going. You don't have to heal, right? It's not a thing. I will never get over my father's death,
Mm-hmm.
right? It will never go back to I will never go back to the way it was. It just becomes a new reality, and I learned to walk with a slightly twinged knee. That's all,
Mm-hmm.
and my
Yeah.
life can
And
still be just as active and as good.
yeah. I mean, yeah, you do it so great because there's every moment of a funeral, different types of funeral
Yeah,
in the book, and it really allows the reader, specifically those who are brought up in a Black community, to understand the layers that are involved to get to that point of like, yeah, you go through all that, but then you still have to figure out like how are you going to deal with it when the lights turn off, when no
no,
one's
like,
around,
yeah.
etc. Yeah. Jason, you do an amazing job of sending the elevator back down. I mean, literally everyone that I talk to speaks very highly of you. You are extremely humble. Um, Talk about why that's important to you because you do it very often without hesitation. Why is sending the elevator back down important to you?
Look, man, I because somebody sent it down for me. Let me tell
Mm,
you, this is a part of my story that people don't always get to hear. Though I've said it, but it doesn't come up as often. And that's that when I got into this industry, bro, the second time because I got in at 21, I got in as a baby. right? I had my first deal at 21. I just didn't do very well. And so when I got back and I couldn't, and then I lost, I got, all the things happen. You get dropped from your agent, dropped from your editor, all that stuff kind of goes on, bad contract, yada, 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 yada. But at 28, 29, 30, let's see, I get back, I think When I Was the Greatest comes out when I'm 30, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what ended up happening was this is the year 2014. So what has happened this year is Walter D. Myers and Christopher Myers has written their articles in the New York Times, which sort of blows up the industry about its lack of representation when it comes to kids of color, right? This is the exact time I'm getting in the game. At the same time, Walter is dying. Walter, who had sort of been a beacon for black boys and black children in literature for 30 years, his transition is coming and he's now dying, right? He's somebody I knew. He was a mentor. His son is one of my best friends. And so that's happening. The same time, because his son is one of my best friends, Christopher is connected to a lot of people that I did not know. And so Chris is like, hey, when you go to this event, I need you to meet go and meet Jacqueline Woodson. She's like a big sister to me. She'll get you situated, right? When you go to this event, make sure you talk to Lori Hart Anderson. Me and her daughter grew up together. She'll get you situated. When you get
Mm-hmm.
there, make sure you go talk to Auntie Sharon Draper. I promise you, man, once she gets to know you, she'll get you situated. Matter of fact,
Mm-hmm.
tell Jackie to introduce you to Rudine Sims Bishop. She's the most quoted person in children's literature, and she runs this thing. She'll get you situated, right? And this is so I like to make sure Sharon Flake, when I met Sharon Flake, same thing. This all happened at the same time, right? Maybe months, like this is like a matter of 3 or 4 months. I'm meeting all of
Wow.
these people, and they're at the height of their career. Rita Williams Garcia, they're all at the height. This is so Brown Girl Dreaming has just come out. Sharon Draper's Stella by Starlight was like rocking at the time. Like everybody is like at a fever pitch, and then the new kid comes in, and they're like, "Hey, young man, we hear you the real deal. We'll make a
Mm-hmm.
space at the table for you. Just tell us what you need." And that's the way it worked. And so I always make sure people know, like when I got in the game, they made a space for me, right? They literally
Mm-hmm.
said, no, 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 you one of us. Like you in it for the long haul. You really got it. You really love it. Your heart is in the right place. You really care about this language and you care about these kids, right? You want to tell good stories. You want to have literary integrity, let alone human
Mm-hmm.
integrity. You want to make sure that like that the stories are entertaining, but hopefully edifying, showing us in a balanced light. You're not afraid, right? All the things, right? You don't mind talking about it. You don't mind being blackety black. You're not scared. You're not gonna cower, right? Come
Mm-hmm.
here with us. And let's figure out how to put you in position so that Deborah Taylor, who was one of the biggest librarians in Baltimore at the time, right? Deborah Taylor pushed me to the forefront, making sure people knew like this is a kid that we need to be paying attention to. So I say that
Mm-hmm.
to say, none of us just arrive. None
Mm-hmm.
of us just become. These people help to build me and to give me a fair swing. The least I could do is pay it forward, right? If I see somebody that I think has the stuff, even if it's just having the fervor, right? The
Mm-hmm.
zeal to like work hard. People who aren't afraid of critique, who aren't afraid to like really put their nose to the grindstone and get it done. People who have a heart for this, right? And a
Mm-hmm.
mind for this, but more importantly, have a stomach to sustain what this industry can do to people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those people, I'm like, nah, come up under this wing. Let me give you some shelter and put you in
Mm-hmm.
position.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Why not? We need
Wow.
the more the merrier. The more the merrier,
Yeah.
You
Yeah. I know. I
Plus you can't be
appreciate
no
that because.
king. Plus you know what they say, man. You can't be no king unless you can be a kingmaker. Our legacies are
Hey.
determined. Our legacies are solidified by who it is we've helped, man.
Mm-hmm. I'm a strong believer in that, and you do such a great job of that because honestly, I've talked to a lot of people just through the podcast, and through just like conversations online and meeting people, and everyone that I talk to, specifically Black people, specifically,
Yeah.
they said that you have influence in some sort of way. So I'm just letting you know that I appreciate you because I remember messaging you. I was like, "Oh, I'm just gonna just check and see," and you didn't even hesitate. You didn't
Yeah.
even hesitate. Hadn't talked to you. ever. I mean, we've engaged a little bit online a couple of times, but you didn't even hesitate. So I appreciate that so much because you don't have to,
Of
right? You
course.
don't
And
have to.
you know who else did it for me? Kiese. Kiese
Mm,
never flinched. I met Kiese in the barbershop.
seriously.
Yeah, let me tell you something. I met Kiese. Nobody knew who he was yet. Kiese was an editor for Gawker. And
An
so,
editor?
yeah, Kiese was an editor for Gawker. And which, for those who don't know on the podcast, was this like, alternative essay site. Like a pop culture essay site.
Mm,
And he was an editor for this joint. And I was just trying to get anything published by any way by anybody. And so I had reached out to him. We did a little work together, but I never met him. And then he had come to Brooklyn to do an event with Darnell Moore.
hmm.
Uh, what's my man? Michael, the dude who wrote Invisible Man got the whole world watching. Michael,
Oh, oh, what's his last
you know what I'm
name?
talking about. Michael. I got three
Yeah,
names.
I know who you're talking about. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and it was one more person who I should know because I talk to him all the time, but I can't call. But they basically were. Kiese has a collection of essays called "How to Kill Yourself and Others Slowly in America," and they were doing an event at a barber shop in Brooklyn, and I went to see if I could like meet him, and I had an arc of when I was the greatest. And
Wow.
when I get to that, and I stand in line, they're signing the books. It's like 100 people in this hot little teeny barbershop, maybe 50 actually. And I get to him and I'm like, hey, I'm Jason Reynolds. We've worked together, briefly. I know you know my homegirl Simone and yada yada yada. And he's like, oh yeah. I'm like, man, I wrote this novel and I would love if you could blurb it. And he was like,
Mm.
what? For real? Man, I'd be honored to blurb you. It's crazy. He does not know who I am. He don't even know if it's going to be published, bro. He's like, for real? He's like, man, I would be honored. So I give him the arc, and a couple weeks later, he sends me back, honestly, a blurb the size of the whole back cover.
Wow.
And the reason why is because it was the first blurb he'd ever given.
Wow.
And I was the first blurb I ever got.
That is I didn't know that story. That's
Yeah, man.
crazy.
Yeah,
That
man.
is crazy. I did the same thing with him. I read Heavy, and then I was going through this podcast phase, and I reached out to him, and he didn't hesitate. And the same thing when the book stuff was happening, reached out, didn't hesitate. And I
Yeah.
mean,
That's
I
how,
totally
that's
get
how it
it.
has to be. That's how it has to be for us.
No, I totally get it. Jay, I
Yeah.
want you to talk about your mom a little bit. You've talked
Mm,
about her a lot through the
yeah,
course of podcasts, interviews, etc. You also did a podcast with mom,
I did.
which is amazing.
Thank you.
How is that process?
Oh, it was the
Doing a
best.
podcast with mom, interacting, um, etc. Because I know the love that you have for her. But what was that process like?
Man, it was a trip. Um,
Mm,
because making a scripted podcast is really hard,
mm,
right? So like it's not like an interview podcast where most of your work is going to come in post, right? It's like
hmm.
you'll clean up what needs to be cleaned up. If anything, you'll make the edits, you'll put in the intro, you'll do right. Like this is how this works. And when you're doing like a scripted podcast, bro, it's so much writing. It's so much like
It's like a
it's
movie. It's just
like
like a
a movie.
movie
You're
without
writing
the
script.
screen.
Yeah. But I got all this raw interview footage, right? So I'm recording my mom as we're hanging out regularly every week. I'm just turning my phone on, or I have a recorder that I got, and I'm turning the recorder on. But I would try to use different methods of doing it because she would get hit, right? It's like there's a machine in the room; it changes her personality, right?
uh,
Pardon me. And so it changes her personality, right? And so I had to figure that out. And I would usually sit it behind us so that she forgot that it was there. And we would just have our
uh-huh.
normal conversations. Then I would go back and I would listen to them all, and I'd be like, my mother can't, I can't put some of this stuff I can't put on in a podcast because my mother is you know what I mean? Because my mother is an old black lady who'll be wild sometimes, right?
You gotta do you gotta do an uncut version.
Yeah, oh my God. It's look when her time is up, I'll put it out. I'm like, yeah. she was saying some wild stuff. I'm like, man, you can't say this. I can't. You know, nobody is more racist than old black ladies, right? Nobody's more
That
prejudiced.
is so true. That is so true.
And I'm like, Mom, we can't. I can't put this on there. But it
It's
was
so
honestly,
true.
honestly, dude, it was amazing. And I have to tell you, I have to be honest, it was selfish because
Mm,
I had an opportunity to get a professionally produced podcast done. And it was like, well, my mother is 78. And at the
hmm.
time she was 75 when we started working on it. And for
Wow.
me, yeah. And for me, it was like, I'm going to want this documentation. I'm going to need this. I'm going to need her voice crystal clear. Like,
Hmm.
right. My dad, I have some stuff from him that I listen to all
Hmm.
the time, his voice and his, all of it, video footage and all of this. And it means the world to me now. And I know that one day, and to have it so pristine, so produced, it's beautiful. It's
Hmm.
almost like listening. It's like listening to like a movie, but the movie
It
of
is.
our relationship
Yeah.
that
It's
I
like an
could listen
album.
forever.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, like
Yep.
an album. Exactly. It's like
Hmm.
listening. It's like songs in the key of Jason and Isabel.
It is. It really is. It
And I'm
really is.
grateful. I'll always be grateful for it, man. I'll always be grateful. It
Oh,
was
it's
amazing.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I think that the process that you guys would have had as well, just like you hanging out, you being there in conversation. I can only imagine. I
Oh,
can only imagine what that looked like.
man. My look, we had a birthday party last weekend. My auntie, her sister turned 80. Man, I wish I could have had the recorder in there, brother. Like it was it's a good time. These old spunky ladies, man. Like there's so much to be grateful for, but there's also
Hmm.
even more to be inspired by, brother. Like, what does it
Yeah.
mean to have gone through what they've gone through and to still be able to take some time to do their dance and to laugh their laughs,
Hmm.
crack their jokes,
Hmm.
and and they all sober now, but they still pretend to drink. They just drink
It's so
a wine
true.
glass. They just drink out of wine
It's so true. Oh. Jason, I
glass.
want you to share about and as much as you can,
But,
obviously, the mouthless god.
oh wow! What can I share? What I can share is the entire book is not that book anymore. You know,
Wow.
yeah, it's not at all. It's not called that. It's not about that. It's not. It's very different. It's a complete overhaul. And this is the thing, right? This is good. I'm glad you asked this question because this is good because I think writers and whoever listens to this podcast, but writers especially, I think especially younger writers coming up in the game, it's like, man, it's important to know that there are some problems that are unsolvable,
Mm,
and the only way to solve them is to basically reframe your entire right to reconsider the entire conceit of the thing.
mm-hmm,
Right, we can try to force it, we can try to bend it into submission, but the truth is that there are some problems in the novel that just don't work. They just you
mm,
can't that are unsolvable. And for me, there were too many problems around the idea of a mouthless child. Now,
mm,
as a fabulistic approach and device, I think it's genius still, right?
mm,
But as something that has to be executed in a world that's supposed to be our world, it's really difficult because there are so many questions that one has to ask, right? Like,
mm-hmm,
why don't they just cut his mouth open? We live in a day of extraordinary technology. Why don't they just cut his mouth open,
mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm,
Or does he lose his mouth? Is he born this way? And if he's born this way, uh, same thing. Why don't they open his mouth as a child? Second thing is, how does he make it this far? How is he?
mm-hmm.
Is his whole? And because he's an active, normal kid who doesn't have a mouth. Well, how does he eat? Right?
How is he surviving?
How is he
Yeah. Uh-huh.
surviving? How is he
Mm-hmm,
surviving? Right? And I
mm-hmm,
thought I had answered these questions, and then I started to write the book and realized that I can't answer these questions, bro. Like and some
mm-hmm,
of this also has to do with ability. Right? I think we have to
mm-hmm,
also talk about how like sometimes the best of us, right? The best of us, our ambitions outsize our ability. but that is the
Yeah.
way that one becomes more able, right? Like you get
Mhm.
better if you aim high, right? I
Mhm.
never want to write a book I know I can write. I
Yep.
only write books that scare me,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Books that I'm
Yep.
not quite sure I'm going to be able to finish, right? And so,
Mhm.
and this one was no different, but it required extraordinary humility coupled with an extraordinary amount of confidence to just scrap it. I've rewritten this
Mhm.
book 7 times, 8 times. I'm finishing up a working draft, what I believe is the working draft. Over the next week or two, I'm rounding the bend. I'm in the finish line right now.
Mhm.
Now it is a story about grief. Funny, my dad died in 2020, so this is all I'm so like where I am in life at the moment. Uh,
Mhm.
is thinking about what it means, like what all of this means, you know.
Mhm.
And it's a story about an island. How much can I say about it? It's about an island. It's about how grief changes people, right? Perhaps
Mhm.
someone is shrinking, perhaps someone is going deaf, perhaps someone is becoming invisible.
Wow.
Perhaps not though, because that's
Mhm.
the way I write. I mean, as you know, it's like maybe, but maybe not, right?
Kind of. I
There's,
appreciate that so much.
there's a
I
lot of
mean,
nuance. There's a lot of
yeah.
nuance, and honestly, I think when I finish it, I honestly believe that it would be a much more beautiful story than what I originally was trying to tackle.
Mhm.
I think it feels delicious.
Mm.
It feels lush. It feels like something you kind of want to sink into. I believe, I
Mhm.
hope. And yeah, man, that's all I can say.
No, it's that's dope, and I think it's. I mean, the first thing I could say to that is just I think this, for me at least, that moment of you sharing that and being vulnerable and like someone like you who has, we don't have to name the accomplishments and the books that you have, but for someone like you to be able to acknowledge the fact that you need to go back and rethink, redo, and
Mhm.
scrap, which I talk about a lot in the classroom too with kids. Like you don't have to take that draft and move it into a publishing phase. You can scrap that if you don't want it. But to
Yeah.
hear it coming from someone who is doing it, I mean, I think that is so powerful. I think that
Mm.
is so powerful because oftentimes you find yourself forcing yourself to write something or to do something just because, whether
Right.
it's the contract, whether it's the people, whether it's the voices, whatever the case may be. But I think that is so powerful. So I don't know who's listening, but I'm gonna make sure I keep this clip because I think that's really, really important, and I appreciate that.
This. And in all seriousness, um, first of all, there's lots of romance in my life, and what I mean by that
Mm,
is my life in and of itself is a very romantic experience. I'm very fortunate. It is not quite as saccharine as romance often is, but it's a romantic way to live, first and foremost. Second of all, let me say this: this book coming out is being called a romance, but it's not a romance.
mm,
It's not to me. It's a love story, and they're not the same thing.
mm.
They're
I
not the same,
agree.
right? Like it's not
Yeah.
a romance, right? I think what I'm trying to actually show is that things don't necessarily have to be romantic for them to be poetic and
Hmm.
for them to be loving, and that sex specifically, especially as it begins, and that
Hmm.
beginning time, um, the airs should be taken off of it. The air
Mm,
should be let out of it so that we can stumble and fumble our way through it and actually have a good time. Let's take the pressure off. Romance
hmm.
often is a pressured space. It's performative. It's performative so often.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so this is a love story. It's pure, right? It's intentional. It's friendship. It's humility. It's modesty. It's honesty. It's courage. It's collaboration and coalition amongst people, right? That's what I'm wrestling with. So I say all that to say is, do I have love in my life? Of
Mm.
course. Of
Of
course I do.
course.
A lot of it. Do I have
Mm.
romantic love in my life? That's never anybody's business.
Hmm.
Not because I have any sort of, because the answer might be like with everything else in my life and work, maybe. right? I've
Mm-hmm.
heard all kind of theories. It's like, yo, I think like I heard somebody once say like either Jason is a womanizer or he's gay. And it's like,
What?
yeah, I've heard all kinds of interesting things about this. And and to that I say, okay, whatever you think, right? I don't know. Okay, like I'm not. First of all, calling me gay isn't offensive to me. Uh,
Uh-huh.
if that's what you think, that's totally fine.
But but for them to even just label you without even having a conversation or,
The
you
womanizer
know,
one is the one I'm offended by. I'm like, what? You think
wow.
and look, and here's the reason why, man. And let's be honest. The reason why I won't, and the truth is that, like I said, there's love in my life. However, that shows itself is nobody's business. But the reason why I won't ever talk about it or why I'm not explicit about it uh, is because I've given away so much of myself. I've,
Mm-hmm.
people know so much about me, about my mom, my upbringing, about my struggles with this, my struggles with that. I've given away so much of myself that there are certain parts of me that I get to protect. And it's not that
Mm-hmm.
somebody once told me, my buddy Ruman Alam, brilliant writer, everyone should. I mean, if you've seen Leave the World Behind, and I mean, but read the book as well. He was doing a piece for the New Yorker on me, and he asked the same question. He said, "Yo, it feels like are you hiding something?" Right. And
Mm,
I was like, no, that's the issue, is that I'm not hiding anything. I was like, what it really comes down to is that if I have a pie that I've made and I decide to
mm,
give you half of it, that means that the half I gave you is your half. And the other
mm-hmm.
half belongs to me.
Is mine.
It's,
Yeah.
it's not it's not his,
Mm-hmm.
it's just mine.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind
I
of where I am.
love that.
When we log off this interview, I'll tell you the answer. Right?
I
I'll
appreciate
tell
you.
you the answer. But I'm not interested in that part of my life being for public consumption.
And I think that's so I love that you shared that because I think specifically authors like you, and I think about you, I think about, you know, Watson, I think about Alexander, I think about, for at least in my world, the
Mhm.
individuals that I look up to in regards to black creators. You give so much. It's so true. You already give so much of who you are in your work, in the interviews, in the articles, the journals, and on the outside, we are so lucky to have that. We are so lucky to have that, right? And then you do the same thing in front of kids, in front of teachers, and you're vulnerable, and you're sharing so many of your experiences within the books as well. Like those are truths of like friendships that you've had or relationships that you've had or whatever the case may be. But I love that you shared that, like you're giving so much already. I think that's a great answer.
Yeah, man.
My last question was, where do people find you? But I don't think anyone really needs to. I don't think you got to say it, but
Yeah.
you could share. Where do people find you online?
You can find me at Jason Reynolds 83 at everything, and then jasonwritesbooks.com is the website with
My
all the
guy,
other
my
stuff.
guy.
Yeah,
And you have the. I guess my other question: any more picture books coming?
yeah. There's another one coming soon.
Let's go.
Yeah, there's
Let's
another
go.
one coming. I guess it's being worked on. I haven't. It takes forever for the illustrators. You know what I mean?
Uh huh.
But it's being illustrated right now.
Let's go.
Yeah, yeah,
Let's go.
yeah.
Let's go. Let's go. I appreciate you, man. I appreciate you so much.
Of course, my brother. Anytime, man.